At the height of the Renaissance, King Henry VIII demonstrated his enthusiasm for marriage by attempting 6 of them himself. It would be an interesting study to consider what impact his bad example and the law reform that necessitated had on English conceptions of marriage. But tonight I mention him only to echo his famous words to each of his wives, "Don't worry, I won't keep you long." Actually, I probably will keep you long, as there is so much to say about the joy of marital love. To speak of Renaissance is, of course, to speak of new birth, and that only comes after death, or something like it. When the Italian city-states first started using the term Renaissance, it expressed their hope of recovering and building on the best from their classical history, after what they perceived as a bleak period, a kind of dark ages of cultural, economic and spiritual decline. So while the very notion of this conference is one of confidence in the institution of marriage, there is an implied realism about the recent challenges to marriage and the marriage-based family. What are those challenges? Over the past half-century or so, our marital culture has been the object of unremitting assault. Rather like a series of big waves knocking us off our surfboards or off our feet, and repeatedly doing so every time we come up for air. It was in the 1960s that we experienced the first of these waves, what I call the sex on demand wave. The prophets of the sexual revolution denied that sex had a marital significance or any intrinsic meaning or limits. Almost every civilization before then had understood that marriage is the appropriate context for sexual relating. Even if some individuals failed to observe this wisdom, some spectacularly so. From the 1960s onwards, however, the growing acceptance of sex outside of marriage denied ordinary people the traditional boundary notions that sex is for marriage and that marriage includes a promise to relate sexually to one person to the exclusion of all others. Next came the divorce on demand wave of the 1970s, when the me generation cast to the wind the notion of lifelong commitments, except as a sentimental ideal for newlyweds and a sacrificial idea for religious fanatics. From that time, the divorce rate in Western countries spiralled, robbing spouses and children of the experience of permanence, and even Christians of the for life horizon for marriage and family. The third wave was the children on demand wave of the 1980s. The greed is good generation reconceived children as consumer items for the shopper with everything. Contraception and abortion having been normalised in the previous decade, children could now be manufactured in laboratories, quality tested before birth, and kept or disposed of depending on whether they satisfied parental expectations. Western nations could now sustain a copulation explosion at the same time as a population implosion. Paul VI's prophecy in Humanae Vitae of a radical break between love-making and life-making, sex and children, was fulfilled as the notion that marriage and marital acts are for family was eroded, denying even Christians a sense of the mystery of fertility and the givenness of children. Fourth came the wedding on demand wave of the 1990s, in which the rave generation reconceived of weddings as another consumer experience, one no longer necessarily connected with faith, kinship or tradition. Weddings are now commonly celebrated at very great expense and outside places of worship. The ceremony, according to the canons of Hollywood and the wedding magazines, rather than of religion and custom. The emphasis increasingly upon externals such as photography, vehicles, receptions and honeymoons, with the ceremony itself pared down to and increasingly sentimentalised and sensationalised. By or through the 90s, long extended cohabitation or trial marriage became normative, while marriage became an optional extra for those who wanted the fairy tale wedding experience or perhaps some promised stability in view of a planned child. We are on the fifth wave, and the fifth wave is the gender on demand wave of the 2000s. In post-modernity, everything is about us, including our male and female identity and our sexual relating, and everything is flexible, a matter of taste, negotiable. Human nature and institutions are no longer seen as given, but rather as matters of social convention and personal choice. People now choose a sexuality or gender from amongst the smorgasbord on offer. They can change gender psychologically, anatomically, or behaviourally as they please. They may engage sexually with one or more persons of one or more sexualities, contemporaneously or sequentially, and they are free to celebrate that publicly through one or more weddings. Thus, marriage in post-modernity becomes infinitely malleable, leaving people free to couple with whom they wish, as they wish, for as long as they wish, unbound by any norms of sacredness, permanence, exclusivity, sexual complementarity, or openness to children. Family, likewise, is manufactured on demand by and on the terms chosen by the powerful. In this process, notions and norms of sexuality and procreation, marriage and family, are radically expanded and in the process trivialised to the point of meaninglessness and undermined to the point of unviability. So buffeted have they been by the series of sexual tides and marital waves that postmoderns are more muddled about the very meaning of marriage than any culture in history, more ambivalent about the desirability of attempting or maintaining marriages than any society we know of, and less able to sustain marriages and marriage-based families over the long haul than ever before. And so today there are people who talk of the death of marriage and tell the churches to butt out of the marriage debate altogether, reserving their matrimonial rituals and presumed to be arbitrary religious laws for serious believers. The renaissance of marriage will require us to help people recover an understanding of the true meaning, an appreciation of the desirability, and confidence in the possibility of living marriage well. And I want to focus the rest of my talk tonight on how that might be done. So we come, after the death of marriage, to the renaissance of marriage. For all the talk of the death of marriage, I don't think we should engage in Ciceronian laments of o tempora o mores. Christians know from faith and experience that rebirth comes after death. After the Dark Ages, Renaissance. And so we look for signs of hope. And signs of hope there are. Pope Francis opened his recent apostolic exhortation with these words: "The joy of love experienced by families is also the joy of the Church. As the Synod Fathers noticed, for all the many signs of crisis in the institution of marriage, the desire to marry and form a family remains vibrant, especially among young people, and this is an inspiration to the Church. As a response to that desire, the Christian proclamation on the family is good news indeed. And so for all the mess in our marital culture, after those 5 waves that I spoke of, marriage remains a bigger part of the picture for Australians than divorce or quasi-marital cohabitation. In 2014, there were 46,000 divorces, but 3 times as many marriages, 121,000 in Australia. For all the experience of failed marriages in modernity, many still believe marriage is worth giving a go, and not just a passing easy go, but giving their all. What's more, the divorce rate in Australia appears to have peaked in the early 2000s and now be in decline. Instead of accepting the inevitability of marital breakdown and therefore eschewing marriage altogether, most people, when surveyed, still believe their greatest happiness will be found in marriage and the marriage-based family. And most remain hopeful of making a good marriage themselves. Another sign of hope is to be found in our birth rate, which after decades of decline now seems to have plateaued and even to be improving. Instead of embracing the life of the DINK, the dual income no kids family, an increasing number of couples seem to be including children in their life plan despite economic and cultural pressures to the contrary. Paradoxically, at the very time when there has been such confusion about marriage in our culture, there has been some real growth in wisdom about marriage. We might think, for instance, of the growing realisation, even amongst secular thinkers, of the importance of the rights and responsibilities of men, of women, and of children within the family, of the importance of love, respect, and intimacy, and of the wickedness of domestic abuse. Or we might think of the rich theology of the body taught by St. John Paul II and being explored during this conference. John Paul the Great built on the work of mostly lay philosophers and theologians, often married themselves. In turn, he gave impetus to a new generation of writers and speakers such as Christopher West on Christian understandings of the human person, sexuality and marriage. And together, this great Pope and his commentators have inspired a great many lay Christians to embrace and live that vision with passion and authenticity. Pope Francis's Amoris Laetitia walks a similar path, and here tonight I want to reflect particularly on just a very few paragraphs, 114 to 117 of the exhortation, in the middle of his section on the joys of married love. Insisting, as he so often does, that it's not good enough for the Church simply to throw stones in the form of dogmatic decrees or pastoral exclusions at those struggling to live marriages well, or experiencing irregularity in their marital situations, or pain in their marital breakdown. The Holy Father does not eschew teaching about the beauty, goodness, truth, sheer joy of Catholic teaching about marriage and the marriage-based family. Reflecting upon the famous hymn to love in the first letter to the Corinthians, so often used, I'd say overused, for weddings, the Holy Father finds in St. Paul many causes for the joy of marital love. And 2 of these are that love believes all things and that love hopes all things. So I come to the cause of our joy, that marital love believes all things. As Pope Francis points out, when Paul says that love believes all things, his words, panta pistani, do not connote blind acceptance. Now, the Greek verb pisteo suggests trust and having reasons to trust. Spouses trust not just that the other means it and is not lying when he or she says, "I promise to love you in good times and in bad," but that they and their spouse are actually made for that kind of loving by our Creator. Written in our very nature is the sexual complementarity by which a man or woman is only completed by giving himself or herself to one of the opposite sex, so that the two become one flesh, and through that, one in spirit. We enjoy marriage. We delight in it because we know that we are made precisely as other-oriented, fulfilled only by giving ourselves to another of the opposite sex. Here we experience what I have called the divine mathematics. 1 + 1 = 2 when a couple are first courting. But by grace and promises, by marital union and married life, 1 + 1 = 1. And then, most often, by grace and generosity, that same marital union and married life, 1 + 1 = 3, and even 4, 5, 6, and more. So in saying love believes all things, Christians are not saying that love makes lovers irrational, that Christian lovers believe any and every foolish thing. No, true love opens us up to understanding and appreciating hard and wonderful things, things that give us deep and abiding and ultimate joy. Counterfeit love and lack of love leave us chasing after passing experiences of intimacy and pleasure, engaging in self-protective strategies of non-commitment, furtiveness and judgmentalism. In trusting in God and in each other, married couples let go of the all too common struggles for power in human relationships, the morbid battles for self-will that so pollute our contemporary culture. As Pope Francis teaches here, love trusts, it sets free, it does not try to control, possess or dominate everything. It frees us to discover our identity and individuality within the context of self-donation and interdependence, rather than through self-invention and rivalry. Which brings me to the second cause of our joy, that marital love hopes all things. Love, St. Paul teaches, believes all things. It also hopes all things. So says Pope Francis, love does not despair of the future. Trusting in divine providence, couples find that God may make crooked lines straight and draw some good even from the evils we endure in this world. Here I mention children, not because they are the evils to be endured amongst the joys of marital love, but because they are especially important ways in which marriage expands our horizons of hope. I think contemporary culture, and especially contemporary politics, suffer from a radical lack of hope, which expresses itself in spending our wealth and energy on passing pleasures and being unwilling seriously to invest ourselves in what we've come to call infrastructure. That is, in social and other institutions that we might not live to enjoy ourselves, but which are essential for the success of future generations, of our children and grandchildren and beyond. So much of politics today is driven by what will bring results within 3 years. And so it's very hard any longer to imagine a Snowy Mountains scheme or a second Sydney airport or the like. A society without children, or in which the links between sex and marriage and family, between child-rearing and happiness, have been radically undermined, will be one in which all energies are focused on the present and too little on what we leave for the future. The contemporary Canadian author, R.J. Anderson, has said that the reason she reads and writes children's books more than books for adults is that children, and therefore the best children's books, have within them an indomitable hope, no matter how bleak things may appear. They are, as it were, Renaissance people amidst the Dark Ages, putty amongst the orcs. This is not because children are naive, but because they have a sense of wonder that allows them to hope that things might change and might be better, when adults can be cynical and inclined to despair. To say that love hopes all things, Pope Francis points out, is to say that the lover knows that others can change, mature, and radiate unexpected beauty and untold potential. Of course, just as I said that a love that believes all things is not blind faith, so a love that hopes all things is not blind hope. To quote Anderson again, hope can be misguided if we put our faith in the wrong person or the wrong thing. Hope can be dashed or deferred, which, as King Solomon said, maketh the heart sick, and sometimes feels worse than never having had any hope at all. Every time we get our hopes up only to be disappointed, it's easier to despise ourselves for being so naive, until we harden our hearts and decide, like the dwarves in C.S. Lewis's The Last Battle, that we will never again be taken in. But the absence of hope is deadly, no matter how rational it might seem. And the fruit of hopelessness is not maturity, but suicide. To sum up my thought then tonight, the cause of our joy in marital loving is faith in God and in one's spouse, and hope in God and in one's children. Built on a proper sense of wonder, a child-inspired hope looks beyond the Dark Ages to the Renaissance, beyond death towards eternal life, and so allows married couples to draw water joyfully from the springs of salvation, while others languish in the desert land of scepticism. So to conclude, you'll be relieved dessert is on its way. I began my talk tonight by noting that at the height of the Renaissance, King Henry VIII demonstrated his enthusiasm for marriage by attempting 6 himself, and wondering what effect his bad example and consequent bad laws had on English marital culture. It certainly occasioned the heroic martyrdom of St. John Fisher and St. Thomas More, layman and cleric, who both died in defence of our understanding of marriage. Similar bravery is required of our generation, and at times it can seem like we are in the dark ages of marriage rather than on the cusp of a renaissance. Yet at almost exactly the same time that Henry was embarking on his marital career, Raphael was painting his wonderful The Marriage of the Virgin, the Sposalizio, now in the Pinacoteca di Brera in Milan. This depiction of a wedding reflected enduring ideals for marriage, despite the storms around marriage and divorce occurring at that time in Europe. In speaking of and demonstrating in their lives the joys of marital love, married couples become like Raphael's portrait, beautiful, living testaments to why lovers might believe all things and hope all things. We look forward to many more causes for that believing, for that hope in our conference ahead. God bless you.